how banks look at credit, how to build better credit, types of mortgage loans and their benefits, available grants and down payment assistance, as well as things to avoid before your home closing. I had a couple of ladies from Port Washington State Bank on with me last week. It was Linda Shea and Tara Byer, and they talked about what we could expect for today's seminar. Um, Columbia also has Linda Ngozi Omegbu, who will be participating with the seminar today as well. So please go to Columbia and get that information. It's all informational things that are important to know. Um, you don't have to be ready to buy a home to attend a seminar like this. When I talk to people around the city about coming out for home buyer seminars, the one response that I keep getting from people is, "Oh, I'm not ready yet. I don't have my credit right yet, or I don't have a down payment yet." This isn't for those who are ready necessarily to buy right away. These seminars are so you can get the information so that you can learn what it is you need to do in order to position yourself to be able to buy. So please don't miss these opportunities to get this type of information. It's very valuable. Again, Columbia Savings and Loan Home Buyer Seminar today at noon and again at 4 p.m., 2020 West Fond du Lac Avenue. So, all right, I'll repeat that again before the end of the show. But for right now, enough said. All right, so I want to switch gears again today and talk about something that we have talked about in the past. I spent a lot of time just generally talking about estate planning matters. Why? Because it all concerns the notion of generational wealth, right? So there's a theme that runs through the different topics that we bring up. And what I've learned is, as a leader, by the time you've said something maybe 20 times, people start to catch on and listen to what you're saying. So I'm going to repeat sometimes things that we've talked about before, but it's all informational. I'm not giving out any legal advice because that's not what we do here. But I do try to bring up topics and have information that will just kind of get people thinking about things that you might need to do in terms of making sure that you've got some sort of an estate plan in place for your life. So I'm going to invite calls right from the beginning. 444 is the number here at the station. 414-444-5250. Okay. Oh, and 53. Okay, Jermaine is telling me something I didn't even know. All right, so I'll say that again. So there's another number, 414-444-5253. In addition to 5250, you can call in with questions, comments, or any story that you might like to tell that relates to anything concerning wills. So, okay, so today what I like to talk about is wills in general. All right. And I've got some tips on how to prevent people from fighting over your will after you're no longer here. And if time permits, I'd like to also discuss topics that married couples that I said must discuss, but I want to be careful how I say things because I'm not giving legal advice. I'm giving my opinion on some things and I'm giving information, but things that you will like to consider discussing even before you meet with any estate planning attorney. Okay. Um, so again, just to start real basic, what is a will? All right. You hear it sometimes referred to as a last will and testament. That is a legal document that describes how you would like your property or your assets to be distributed after your death. A person in your will that is described as a testator, that is the person who creates the will. So that's you if it's your will. There's also the term executor. That is a person who is appointed to carry out your will. You may also see an executor referred to as a personal representative in your will. That just means it's the person who is appointed by you to carry out whatever the terms are that you specify in your will. Another word worth defining here is beneficiaries. So, what is a beneficiary? Beneficiaries are people who inherit gifts or other assets by the terms of your will. So if you just hear those basic terms, that's just to give you an understanding of what those things mean. It's no more than that. It's actually really basic definitions of the key individuals that might those titles might come up. And if you're ever wondering, what does that mean to be an executor? What does it mean to be a testator? Now you know what those things mean. So, what are the benefits of having a will? Well, the primary benefit of having a will is so you can be the person that decides where your assets go if you're no longer alive. If you don't have a will or some other sort of estate planning tool, right now we're just talking about very, very basic things such as a will. There are all sorts of different estate planning tools that we have talked about in different shows, and we'll talk a little bit more about, let's say, something like a trust. That's a little more sophisticated, a little more of a complicated tool. So I'm going to bring in some experts for a later show, and we'll talk a little bit more about what that means. And I should just go ahead and say that the experts that I'll be bringing are my own two paralegals that work with my law practice. Angie and Kelly are going to join me for a later show where we're going to talk a little more in depth about other tools of estate planning. So be on the lookout for that show down the road. But for right now, I'm just basically today going to talk about the importance of having a will. Um, so again, why is it important to have a will? So you can decide where your assets go. If you do not have a will, if you pass away in Wisconsin without a will, the state of Wisconsin imposes a will for you, right? Then your will becomes imposed by statute. So there's statutes in Wisconsin that talk about how any assets you have will be dispersed. It's called intestate succession, right? Because if you die without a will, you are considered to have died intestate. So if you do have some assets that need to be dispersed, and if you don't have a will in place, the law will basically say, all right, here's where they're going to go. So, for instance, if you're a married person and you don't have a will, you die, well, the law will say your spouse will inherit. But then there's situations where maybe you had children that were outside of this marriage, that maybe they're adults or maybe they're not adults, and so it can get to be a little more complicated. Let's say if you weren't married at all. The example that we talked about um, the last time we talked about this topic was um, one of my favorite artists, if not my absolute favorite of all time, was Prince, right? I think a lot of people know just from watching the news that Prince passed away back in 2016. I like to refer to him as the late, the great, the honorable Mr. Prince Rogers Nelson. Jermaine, are you old enough to be with me on that one and talk about His Highness?
Come on now. I'm a musician, so I
Well,
love Prince.
okay, well, there you
Yeah,
go. That's
yeah.
right. You're a musician. So a musician will respect the musicianship of a genius. I refer to him as a raging genius. You
Yeah,
agree
he
with
was
that?
he was he was incredible. Like he wrote his own music, played his own music, recorded his own music. So he was most definitely one of a kind.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. There's nobody like him. And there's I know a lot of times what's the gentleman that sings that and I'm bad because I know his name, but the Uptown Funk, you know who I'm talking about. Yeah.
Bruno.
Yeah. And I like Bruno, and Bruno has a lot of talent, and I respect it. But people try to compare him with His Highness, and I got an issue with that. But we'll take that up on another show. That's just my little side note here that I just my stream of consciousness. But when I'm talking about Prince, it's something different. So, okay, but anyway, the reason that I brought him up is because people may be aware that Prince died without a will, right? And he was not a married man at the time that he passed away, and he had no surviving children. He had a son at one point with his former wife, but that child died as an infant. So his estate, according to the laws of the state that he was in, his estate passed to his six siblings. His parents had already predeceased him. That's just a way of saying that his parents died before he did, right? So his parents did not inherit because they were already gone. So that the law said that, okay, well, now your six siblings, um, most of whom were half siblings, but I don't suppose that that matters in some instances. But they did inherit his estate. Three of them sold their shares to a company that bought the rights to Prince's back catalog, and it took about 6 years to settle his estate. His estate at the time that he died, I believe, was worth somewhere approximately between 200 to $300 million, and it cost about $3 million in attorney's fees in order to settle his estate. So a lot of money that got spent on lawyers. Now, I, of all people, don't have an issue with lawyers being well paid and earning money, right? But you also don't want to see a situation where money just gets squandered because of a lack of planning on the front end. Um, some of you might remember that Prince had a dispute with Warner Brothers years ago over the ownership of his own music. And so I wonder, with the way his estate was handled, where it went to his siblings, which he was often at at in discord with his siblings. I know there was at least one sibling that had sued him in court over some things. So I don't know that those were the people he really would have wanted his estate to pass on to. But because there wasn't a will, he didn't get a say in it. It had to go by the statute. And then for three of them to turn around and sell those rights back to a corporation after Prince had been in dispute with a corporation for years. I mean, some of you might remember when he wrote the word slave on his face. Well, that was why he did that. He was protesting that, Warner Brothers owned Purple Rain, that his crowning glory masterpiece, of an album, and he didn't own the rights to those things. And it was because of some, in my opinion, unfair contracts that were entered into early on in the career. And then once they've got you in that chokehold, once you blow up and become as big as he was, making the type of money that he was, and it's just unfair then that somebody else owns the rights to your hard earned work. So since he didn't have a will at the time that he died, a lot of his what he was fighting for ended up ultimately being corporately owned again anyway. um I know I was talking, the bank president, Ernest Jones, and I were talking a few weeks ago how Sheila E. had shown up at Paisley Park to try to do a video, to have a video recorded there, is what I think it was. And, the corporate people that are running Paisley Park, which some of you will know was Prince's home in Minnesota where he used to live. And it was also where he recorded, because of course there's studios in there, and now they use it as a museum. You can come and tour and see all of his outfits, his guitars, his cars, and all of these things. Because of course I've been there as a Prince fan. Of course I've been there, but they turned Sheila E. away. Sheila E. came, thought that she was going to be able to bring her crew in there and go into these recording studios where she worked with Prince, 40 years ago or however long ago, when she was in there recording, probably, I don't know, Glamorous Life and, all these songs and things that she had back then. But it was a place that was familiar to her. So she thought she could go in there and record. But the corporate sponsorship now that owns all of this, I won't even say sponsorship, ownership, that's in charge now of this museum, turned her away. And she was saying that her feelings were hurt about it, but there wasn't anything that she could do other than turn away. Now, granted, she did show up without notice, and they did tell her that, they'd host her another time as long as they get a heads up. But I just segueing off of it. I'm just really trying to underscore the point that if you put a will in place, you can have things handled the way you would have wanted them handled when you're no longer here. And if you don't do that, then situations come up, other people step in, and then they take charge and things go how they say that they're going to go. So we will never know how Prince may have wanted to allocate his estate and his assets, but we'll never know, because he didn't do that. Um, he was a very generous person during his lifetime. So who's to say, he might have wanted to leave things to charity or, something. I don't know. We'll never know. But the fact that he was only 57 years old at the time when he died, I'm old enough now to know that 57 is not old, right? That used to sound like it maybe when I was, a couple decades younger, but that's a very young age to go. So he probably didn't even think he was anywhere near death. I wouldn't think that at that young of an age. Um, but the point that I'm making is that estate planning is not just for elderly people. These are the sorts of things that you should think about, even as a younger person. Whether you have a family or not is also an important thought in the process. If you've got a family, even if you're in your 20s, if you've got some assets, you have a spouse or you have children, don't wait and say, oh, well, estate planning and drafting wills, that'll be important when I'm 70 or when I'm 80 years old. No, if you've got people who depend on you, for their life and their home or their whatever, their survival, then please consider talking to an attorney, to work out an estate plan. I'd like to let you know that the name of my law firm is the Ples Law Firm. The phone number is 414-247-9570. That's 414-247-9570. You can call or even preferably text that number with your information, and we can arrange a free consultation to discuss your estate planning needs. So we'll be right back. We're going to break now, and I'll talk more about the importance of having a will. Talk to you soon. Okay, welcome back to Money Talks with Attorney Coral. Thank you for continuing to listen. I've been talking about wills and the importance of having a will. What I'd like to do now is just shift a little bit and talk about things that you can do to try to avoid relatives from fighting over your estate. Okay, again, it's not legal advice, just some informational information. It's just some information for you to consider. Okay, so people in my experience will try to fight over an estate when they don't like the outcome. um and I've seen this, and I don't know why I've seen it so much lately. Siblings end up becoming enemies and sometimes never speaking again. um People will contest your estate, um but they're not going to win if the only reason that they contest it is because they don't like what you're saying in the will. They've got to have something more than, oh, I just don't like it, therefore I'm going to contest it. That doesn't carry the day in court. You need something more than that. So people will then look for legal reasons, right, to contest an estate. So one thing that they might try to argue is the validity of the will. You see that that'll happen sometimes, that people will say, nah, I don't believe that that was really his will. I don't believe this was really his signature. Or or the notion of something like undue influence. I don't believe this is really what he meant. I don't believe this is really what he wanted. Somebody tricked him, somebody lied, or someone misrepresented something, and that's the only reason he put this clause in the will. Another reason that people may try to argue as a legal reason is a notion of the capacity of the testator. Remember, I told you the testator is you, the person who's writing the will. So, capacity of the testator. In other words, what was their mental state? Were they mentally competent? Were they able to understand what was going on? Were they too sick? Were they unconscious? Did they have the capacity to say or to implement this will? So, what can you do to reduce the likelihood of a fight over your estate? Well, the number one topic in my notes is you get good advice, right? And then you meet with someone that will help you to dot your I's and cross your T's so that you can avoid ambiguity in your will. That's an important thing. It sounds like it's so simple, but you don't want any provision in your will that is ambiguous. You want everything to be crystal clear. I want to give this to this person. I want to give that to that person, that sort of thing, so that it's clear in your will. You might consider including what is known as a no contest clause. And I didn't see that a lot early in my career, but I've seen it more in recent years where people will say, all right, I'm going to include a clause in my will that says if you contest it, you get nothing. And that's something that you see more and more, but it's something to consider when putting a will together. So I'm noticing that we've got a caller on hold. So I'll go ahead and take the call and then continue with my thoughts on ways to avoid a dispute in your will. So caller, please go ahead. Thank you for calling.
And thank you for taking my call. And thank you so very much for being.
Oh, it looks like we lost you. Okay. So sorry about that, caller. Please just give us a call back and then we'll take you right away. I'll continue talking until you're able to get back in. The connection was a little strange, so it was a little bit hard to hear you. Um Okay, so the next comment that I have is that you should consider creating an estate plan while your capacity is good. So, again, this goes to that notion of don't necessarily wait until you are very elderly. I mean, you might be a very fortunate person who, even when you're very advanced in age, that the synapses might still be sharp and everything is clear and you're well spoken and able to process information, but you just never know. So if a person could get sick, even younger people can get sick. And then sometimes it, depending upon if you have an illness that advances, that could affect your mental capacity to fully understand and fully process what it is you're saying and doing in the course of your will. So that's important, to something to factor in. And it's hard because, these are the tough conversations that generally people don't like to have. Nobody likes to think about the possibility of getting sick and not having the capacity to make decisions for themselves. But when you're well, when your mind is clear and strong, this is when you should consider putting important documents in place. Don't wait until you're sick and in some sort of emotional or mental or physical distress in order to do it. The number here is 414 444 5250 or 414 444 5253. You can call us and join the conversation. If the person whose call just dropped would like to call back, we're still here, so we'd be happy to hear from you. Um, the next point that I would like to raise is that you should not ever let it appear that you're being influenced by someone when you're putting a will together. So I'll give more examples and talk about that um, in just a moment, because it looks like we've got another caller that's calling in, and I would like to hear from the audience more than I would just like to hear from the audience. Oh, we lost it. Oh, okay. I don't know what's happening, but all right, I'll keep talking. Sorry about that. I saw that there was a caller holding. Try us again, 414-444-5250 or 414-444-5250 or 5253. Okay? Either one of those will get you to us, and apologize that these calls are I don't know what's going on, but all right. So when I said don't ever let it appear that you're being influenced by someone. All right. So let's say if you've got an example where there are two brothers. One brother makes an appointment for their father to meet with an attorney. Let's say this one brother also drives the father to that appointment. Um, that same brother sits in on the appointment. And it turns out that this attorney is a friend of the brother who scheduled this appointment and brought the dad to the appointment and sat in on the appointment. Um, and he sat there while the father told the attorney what he wanted in the will. Okay. But then there's another brother who did not make the appointment with the attorney, is not friends with the attorney, did not drive the dad to the appointment, did not sit in on that appointment, even though the dad told the attorney what he wanted. That other brother is going to be understandably suspicious that maybe the first brother had some sort of undue influence on what the father told the attorney he wanted in the will. So it's biblical, right? To say that you must avoid even the appearance of impropriety. So regardless of whether or not that first brother unduly influenced the father, it sure looked like there was potential for um, an undue influence. So you want to avoid things like that. This is a common sense thing, right? Anybody knows in that situation that it's going to look like that one brother could have had some influence. So I'm just saying, don't do that sort of thing. Um, it just makes it harder. It looks like there may be undue influence, and undue influence, like I mentioned before, could be a way of attacking the will. That's something more than just saying, "Well, I don't like the terms." Well, if that's all you've got, I don't like the terms. You're not going anywhere with your court case to challenge the will. But if you can show examples of potentially undue influence, well, that document could be considered not valid. It'd be up to a judge to decide, but don't put yourself in a predicament where that's even an issue. That's the point that I'm making. The other recommendation that I would have is to communicate um, your truth to your heirs. Okay. And the example that I like to give there, this time I'll talk about sisters. I just used brothers generically before, but it could be any sibling connection. So let's say one sister sacrificed her career to take care of an elderly parent. One sister cooked and cleaned and took the father to the medical appointments, took the father into her home and took care of him. And let's say the other sister didn't. And it's not any criticism to the sister who didn't. Maybe they got together as a family and decided that it maybe was better for one sister to do it versus the other. Or maybe one sister had the opportunity, or just schedule wise just was in a better position to take the lead and care for the parent more so than the other. Well, if that one sister ended up sacrificing her career or her ability to earn or her own financial stability in a way, the father in his will may take that into consideration. And he may just say, well, you know what? I love both my daughters equally. But I'm going to disproportionately consider leaving things to this one daughter because she sacrificed herself in a role to be of support to me in my senior years. And if everyone sits and they're fair minded, they may all understand that, and it wouldn't be an issue. Sometimes it is, but it just depends on people. But I guess what I'm just suggesting is that sometimes it's better to just talk about things openly so people have an understanding why you're doing the things that you're doing. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to try one more time to take the caller that's calling in before I switch the topic a little bit. So caller, please go ahead. I hoping that we don't lose you. Go ahead, please.
Yes. First of all, thank you so very much for being there and sharing your information.
Thank you. You're
So
welcome.
you had okay, and you had asked earlier. Can you ask that question again? Excuse me, because I was trying to get in, trying to call, so I kind of lost that. But something you had said earlier about, could you please share that with me again, please?
I'm not sure specifically what you're
Hmm.
referring to. Was it a question that I put to the audience?
Yes.
Okay. I'm not sure what specifically I may have said as a question, because some of what I have an outline in front of me that I prepare with bullet points that I want to hit, but some of this is me just kind of freely speaking. So I'm not really sure what.
I feel you. I feel you on that.
Yeah, yeah.
So please excuse me. I understand that.
Oh, no problem at all.
However, however, you had mentioned. I think you had mentioned something about uh, people that I don't know. Um, I'm just trying to say, because you had mentioned so many outstanding things in your conversation in your itinerary this morning.
Okay.
Uh, but you had said something about uh, people not knowing about the help or something like that. I don't, financial help.
Okay. Yeah, Jermaine was just
Hmm.
saying something too, that what he thought it might be. What did you think, Jermaine, that it might have been?
Was it the fact of people not putting in place for their will, and then the family fighting over
That's
the
the
will?
one.
Okay.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Because you was making a very valid point about that.
Okay.
Now, if I may, I would like to add something on that,
Please.
because when it comes to having a will or something like that, if you have a estate, if you're rich enough, you have a will for that, right? And
Okay.
like you said, when family come around, some families say, "Well, Dad said I can have that. Mama said I can have that." So excuse me for sounding somewhat, I don't know. But you're absolutely right, because when it comes to a will, because a lot of us, it's not that rich to have wills. But when we have something left in the family, you're right. People come around, they family get mad at each other. Just like you just said. Now it's coming back to me. So excuse me. Now it's coming back to me. But anyway, I want to thank you, everybody, so very much for being there. But you're absolutely right, because when it comes to what we have, um, family, mama said and such can have this, and such can have that. That's a very conflict situation, especially depending on how rich you are, how poor you are. But I'm trying to say, my experience is when my dad, okay, left me a guitar. He's okay. I'm his older son, and he's Mr. James Turner. Uh, used to serve in, did a band thing. But make a long story short, I appreciate what you're trying to say because sometimes, depending on how rich or poor you are, wherever the case may be, the fact is we have to find a way to let people know I want you to have this and to have that, and still that be an argument. But what can you do with that though? So that's my question.
Yeah, right.
You know.
And I really like your question, because
Mhm.
it's right on point. You are hitting at the heart of what we're talking about today. And I would say this though, whether rich or poor, putting a will in place, it's one of the most basic and relatively least expensive estate planning tools that's out there. And something like a guitar that you mentioned, that could be something that's very valuable. It could be, and it sounds like you were talking about something from like a professional capacity, right? That sometimes those instruments are worth thousands of dollars. So it'd be well worth it to write something out if you're going to be um, giving away assets that have significant value. It's well worth it to write something out so that there isn't infighting after you're gone, between the siblings or whomever else, over the assets that are there. So I appreciate the call and I appreciate the comments because it's right on topic with what we're talking about. The only thing that I would say is that, um, whether rich or poor, look into some basic estate planning tools, because there's certain more higher end estate planning. If you've got more assets, then that's something that's more appropriate. But maybe a simple will or some other tool might be of use and of value to you. So don't hesitate to reach out to the Ples Law Firm at 414-247-9570. That is 414-247-9570. That is the number to my law firm. You'll be able to leave either a voice message for me or a text message to me at that number. And then I would arrange for you to have a consultation of no charge to talk about your particular circumstances and what type of estate plan might be appropriate for you. If you've got questions for us here while we're at the radio station, the number here again is 414-444-5250. Okay. So I'd like to talk a little bit about things that married couples should consider before meeting with an attorney. Just something to keep in your mind. You're going to talk to the attorney about these sorts of issues, but these are the sorts of things that you might want to just kind of sit with your spouse and just roll it around a little bit to see what thoughts you would have. Okay. So the number one thing that I would say, if you're a married couple, that you should consider before meeting with an attorney: what happens when one of you pass away? What happens if one of us passes away? Will you want to leave things 100% to your surviving spouse? You see that a lot when people have been married for a long, long time. That's very common. Sometimes when people are a little bit younger, they may say, well, hey, what if my spouse remarries? What if we're young right now and we've got young children? And if something unforeseen happens to me, maybe I would want to consider creating a trust to protect some assets for the kids. Because what if a situation where your spouse might remarry and maybe you want to just anticipate how that might affect whatever assets you may have accumulated and how those things are allowed to pass on to your children. It's just something that you might want to consider and sit and talk with an attorney about. We have another caller, so I would like to let the caller speak before I go on with other tips that I would like for you to consider. Caller, thank you. Please go ahead.
Good morning. Thank you for taking my call, and
Good morning.
assalamu alaikum to you,
Thank
sister.
you.
Yes, ma'am. I agree 100% with everything that you have been saying. I have no contention with anything, but I have a question with regard to trust. You, I'm sure you understand that, and you know what I'm talking about
Yes.
because that's probably in your field or purview of finances or whatnot. So, and I have another question. There is something called uh, wow, this type of insurance. I think it's not like a regular insurance. I don't want to say they provide an acronym. If I say UI, it sounds like AI, and that sounds like But there's a type of insurance that I've seen on Instagram, and whereas it allows you to accumulate accrue some type of interest, whereas you can draw from it as you live and don't have to wait for yourself to die. And I wonder if you could speak on those things as well, like trust and that those forms of insurance that you might. I'm sure you have a broader understanding of it than myself. So thank you for taking my call.
No, thank you, and thank you for
Yes,
calling in. So I'll tell you, I appreciate you raising the topics. It's these types of issues are so in depth that what I think is probably the best thing to do. I'll bring in someone who's an expert that can talk about insurance and talk about the different types of insurances, and in particular to talk about the type of insurance, as you mentioned, that you can maybe pull money from or borrow from, or however it works during your lifetime, not necessarily after you're gone. Those are different types of insurances that serve different purposes. You mentioned that you've been seeing it lately on Instagram. I can even take a look and just see if I see the same thing. But what one of the things that I'm planning to do as we move forward with the show is bring someone in that will specifically talk about insurance, because I think that's a show in and of itself, more than I could do justice just in the few minutes that we have left here today. Um, Also, when it comes to trusts, you're right. It's definitely an estate planning tool that is a powerful one. Um, and we consult with people, with my legal team, myself and my two paralegals, and we talk to people. We have a questionnaire. We interview you. We look at your particular circumstances, and then we give you a recommendation as to what we think might best suit your needs. And for a lot of people, a trust document works as a powerful estate planning tool rather than just a will standing alone. It's really a circumstantial thing where every case is different, every customer is different, with different needs. So I will be bringing them in and we'll do a show. But in the meantime, if you did want to meet with us to speak to us privately about that, the Ples Law Firm is the name of my business. The number is 414-247-9570. And you should have an opportunity to leave a voice message for me there. Or please don't hesitate to text to that number, because sometimes I got a lot of balls in the air, and the texting is the best way to get a hold of me sometimes, if you don't mind. You could simply just leave your name, your contact number, and say, I would like a free consultation for my estate. Okay. So thank you so much. We've got to take a break, but we'll be back with more Money Talks with Attorney Coral. Thank you. Okay, thank you. Welcome back to Money Talks with Attorney Coral. We've got a caller on hold right away. I want to go ahead and get to that caller. Caller, please go ahead.
Good morning, everybody. My question is, if you have a living trust and you get married after the living trust has been established, what happens next?
Well,
Does your husband get to, get half of it or majority of it? How does that work?
These are excellent questions, but these are the types of questions that get into an arena of advice that I have to be a little bit careful about on the radio. So what I would ask, if you don't mind, to present that question to me privately, with my number for the law firm, which is 414-247-9570. That is 414-247-9570. You can call that number, leave a voice message, or you can text just your name and your number and just say a state question, and then I will make sure that you get a response. So I do appreciate that call. Um, I'd like to talk a little bit more about things that married couples should consider before meeting with an attorney. I always do this, and I have this in the outline. This is the part that I never get to. But one other thing that I would ask people to consider what should happen when both people pass away. Do you want to leave things equally to your children? Do you want to leave things to your grandchildren? Do you want to leave things disproportionately amongst your children? So why would you want to leave things disproportionately to your children? Well, what if you know that you have a son that may blow through everything? You might want to consider then a trust. Um, and in order to protect assets, or maybe one of your adult children has a spouse that you don't trust or maybe don't like, and you just don't want them to have influence over your son or daughter as that spouse. So you might want to consider, um, again, it's just the circumstances in your particular case. That's why I declined to answer the question on air, because I have several follow-up questions to go with that, and it gets to be a little too personal to do over the radio. We need to have that conversation privately, but these are the sorts of things to consider. You also should consider who you're going to nominate to be the executor or personal representative of your estate. Do you want to choose your oldest child? Do you want to choose your most responsible child? Maybe they're one and the same, but sometimes they're not. You might have a situation where the middle child is the most responsible, or even the youngest may be the person that you choose. Um, this question kind of came up earlier. What should you do with your personal effects? Again, should you just let the kids figure it out? Then they may be fighting over things that have some value. We talked about a guitar that was probably something very valuable, because we were talking about someone who was a professional musician. That makes a difference. Are you going to let the kids figure it out? Or are you going to do specific bequests? In other words, specific gifts to the children? Or are you going to decide and say this person gets this and this person gets that? How specific do you need to be? Um, you will want to consider who should handle your money if one or both of you becomes incapacitated. We talked about that before, a power of attorney, and when it might make sense to put those in place. We'll talk again about those things, because we talked about it before doesn't mean we shouldn't talk about it again, so everyone can consider these things. But these are just the types of things you should have in your mind. What if a person has dementia? Who can make healthcare decisions for that person? The spouse, someone other than the spouse? Question about withholding feeding tubes, etc. All these sorts of things. I'm just making very surface comments just to get us thinking. If these are things that you would like to discuss further, please don't hesitate to reach out. The name of my firm is the Plez Law Firm. The phone number is 414-247-9570. That's 414-247-9570. You can call the number, or you can text the number and say, I'm so and so, here's my number. I'd like to talk to you with a free consultation to discuss my estate planning needs. So, a special thank you again to Columbia Savings and Loan Association for sponsoring the show. I would just like to reiterate that Columbia Savings and Loan Association is in partnership with Port Washington State Bank. And today at noon, so literally 3 minutes from now, or 4 minutes from now, there's going to be a home buyers seminar. Those two financial institutions are teaming up in order to have a presentation that is free to the community. You go to the bank and you just say, hey, I want to learn some new information about the home buying process. And they're going to talk about how owning your home builds generational wealth. They're going to talk to you about how banks look at credit and, importantly, how to build better credit. They're going to talk about different types of mortgage loans and their benefits. They're going to talk about available grant money and down payment assistance. And importantly, they're going to talk about things to avoid before your home closing. They're going to be serving some good food after this seminar. So I'm going to get back to the bank and see what I can sit in on this seminar. And hopefully have enough food left over for me to have something too. So come on out. They're at noon today and again at 4 p.m. today at the bank. Come on out and learn some new information about the home buying process. So thank you so much for joining, and we'll be back with more estate planning information at a later time. Have a great week.